Alrighty, looks like we might be live and alive. Let's check a couple settings.
Name is media.
Nope, that's incorrect. Let's do that one.
And money control all of politics.
There we are. Alright. Sorry, I had to reset a couple things. We might turn that back up just a smidge, give this one a little smack. And we are ready to go. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. We are finishing up our review discussion of Cenk Uygur's Jubilee. So Cenk Uygur did a Jubilee Surrounded. So far it has been not quite so terrible as the last one, but honestly, you're going to be hard pressed to find a worse Jubilee Surrounded than that last one. That was bad and regrettable. But here we are. We got our setup somewhat working here a little bit. We got our, everything seems to be streaming all right. Okay, let's go. So we're on to Cenk's, I believe, fourth.
My last claim is media and money control all of politics.
All right, so here's my kind of problem so far with Cenk, is I feel like every single claim here is exactly kind of the same as the other ones. So media and money control all politics. Now, immediately we're going to have some degree of arguments of semantics. Again, all politics, arguments of degree is going to be coming up. And then even arguments specifically looking at politics. So again, you break this up. So, media control politics. Money controls politics. If we're breaking this down to its individual kind of points, we can even just kind of summarize this as politics is how would we phrase that? And it's kind of a simplistic statement. Basically, media concerns, which are money concerns in a capitalist market, what media concerns, which are money concerns, dictate what politics are front and center in the social and cultural discourse. Again, this is actually not particularly too far off from, again, it's an oversimplistic understanding of this, but this isn't too far off from things like, if you wanted to read more about this kind of concept, this kind of relates to manufactured consent, which is kind of a Chomsky idea. So I'm not necessarily opposed to this. Again, I would not say all. I think that is too hard of a statement. I would certainly say that media and money have a disproportionate effect, or media and money act as a filter and or control of political discourse. Though I do feel like that might be putting the cart before the horse, because more often than not you have some degree of monetary and or political desire. That would be more in the manufactured kind of consent areas, that there is a power dynamic, whether that power be enacted through the governmental structure and the politics necessary to attain that governmental position and the monetary money system required to support you getting to that system, point of power. And media, this would be manufactured content. Media acts as a sort of filter and or control mechanism to maintain the narrative and control what narratives are and are not present, and thus that controls the general information flow and the narrative structure of people's thoughts. People tend to think in stories or put themselves in as stories, either affected by or they want affecting, blah, blah, blah. But, okay, let's see what people say.
Hey, nice to see you again.
Good to see you, bud.
Okay, so we disagree on the framing. We might not disagree on the substance. So when you say they control all of politics, I feel like that breeds a lot of cynicism, which is kind of my issue with populism. Is you tell these people like it's hopeless, corporations, media control all of it.
So his argument is populism and this sentiment breeds get his words as close as possible.
Good to see you, bud.
Okay, so we disagree on the framing. We might not disagree on the substance. So when you say they control all of politics, I feel like that breeds a lot of cynicism, which is kind of my issue with populism. Is you tell these people like it's hopeless, corporations, media control all of it. But what's kind of implied in your premise, like media, for example, media is effective because it influences the people who actually vote and have a lot of power. Same thing with super PACs. They're spending on advertisements a lot of the time. So
media does have impact, and that offers some power to the people as they can play the game too. Seems to be kind of the general sentiment.
I think when you paint this narrative that they control all of it, disproportionate, yes, a lot more than they should, yes, we agree. Campaign finance reform, yes. I feel like a lot of people, especially in my generation, just check out of politics. Like the corporations are going to do what they want to do. The media's going to do what they want to do. I'm just going to scroll on TikTok. And I feel like it's very damaging to our society.
Yeah. So number one, I'm a huge believer in hope. So I would never say don't get involved in politics. In fact, that's why I started Justice Democrats to bring progressives in the Congress. I started Wolfpack to take money out of politics. And Rebellion PAC is saying, no, get involved. And that 2028 primary on the Democratic side is maybe the most important election of our lifetimes. We have to pick a populist so that we'll actually deliver for the American.
Okay, so his response is not intended to lose hope. It is intended to get you involved. You can almost kind of see a sort of get angry and get involved. We want you to realize that these guys are stacking the deck against you, but you can affect that kind of change. Okay, all right.
American people. So if you deliver for the American people, if you stop.
And his kind of secondary point there is deliver for the people via a I don't know why I keep doing that. A person that represents the popular sentiment of the people, then you win and fight back against the minority opinion of the rich. All right, standard populist kind of rhetoric. Sounds normal.
lying to them and say you're going to do things and then never do it. If you actually do those things that are very, very popular, then you'll re-energize the entire voting
So when
base.
you say we need to pick a populist, is your definition of populism just like when good things happen, that's populism? Like,
No.
Is it conceivable for there to be a candidate who is a great president, for example, but they're not necessarily a populist, or is that like necessitated?
So all populism means is serving the average guys as opposed to serving the corporate donors.
more
So
of a
I'll give you
marketing technique,
no, it's not a marketing technique. It's
elites
very
versus the average
no, it's
person.
very no. You're asking if it's vague or specific, and it couldn't be more specific. There's literally a populist plank on tyt.com, and that's the core of what our candidates run on Rebellion PAC. And those are 6 policies: money out of politics, anti-war, lower drug prices by negotiating at Medicare. By the way, lower housing prices by banning private equity from buying residential real estate. They're robbing us of our wealth creation in this country. That's going to destroy the middle class. So paid family leave, again, these are very easy to pass. If you say you can't pass at 84%, then you can't pass anything.
But we don't pass
and
things
yes,
through public
higher
opinion
wages.
polls. We don't pass things through public opinion polls. You need people to get involved on a very
Okay, so sounds like and like this again. The system is that we don't pass things based on opinion polls. We pass things through the electorate, which means that popular is not necessarily successessul, we might say. So we have to elect people. Okay, this is usually again the counterclaim to most of this stuff is that populism is popular and it sounds really nice to the average person, but we don't elect this also seems somewhat counterintuitive. There's a degree of kind of elite bigotry and patronizing here, because what ends up happening is like, oh well, we don't pass things through opinion polls, we pass things through the electorate, so it's more complicated. People vote, and then the people who win those votes, they themselves vote and pass on things. So this is we're representative, not a collective. So we have to focus on the representation, though this can be somewhat complicated, because now you're then going, okay, but is the candidate elected based on policies, based on popularity? What elects the candidate? And then the candidate is in the system. So okay, so why is it? And you can always just say this is just the way it is, tough shit, which is somewhat of a cop-out in many ways, to say, oh, well, yes, sure, these things are popular, but we need to get the votes, we need to get people. But it kind of comes from the things where like, yeah, but then why don't we vote for popular people? Or why don't we put forward the popular people who have the popular policies that people want to pass? Why aren't they primaried? And then why aren't they put into the position, or heavily influenced to put into the position, more likely to be put in the position? And then once in that position, why don't we hold them accountable? Or why is no system in place to hold them accountable, to essentially make them vote along the lines of what their representatives, or what their represented base wants to do? Again, there's dangers here and there, but it does seem kind of this weird, I don't want to sound mean, but it sounds like this weird beaten wife syndrome, to where you can't really change the system. It's completely and utterly hopeless, and you just have to play by this incrementalist rule book, and just kind of go, well, we can't get money out of politics, we can't do any of this, we can't do anything at all, but we can vote, and we can get the special people in there, these elites who know better than any of these stupid popular people, populist kind of sentiments, and then they will they will do what's necessary, and yeah, sure, they're going to compromise and they're not going to vote along the lines of what their constituency actually wants, but they need to do this to maintain power. It ends up making a game of the system rather than making the system function for the people, and that would be the primary populist sentiment, which I have some reservations about, but I do have quite a bit of fondness or positive association with that, in the simple sense that this guy was just talking about what makes people sound hopeless. They have all the control. This also makes people feel hopeless in the sense that, well, no matter what, no matter how much I tell my candidate and how many people like me tell my representative, I really want this, please give this, no matter what, they go off behind the curtain, and then they come back with, their hands in their pockets and just kind of go, well, shucks, we tried. um no matter what happens. And it's just like this, okay, well, what's going on behind the goddamn curtain? Why the hell is this allowed? Why can't this happen if this is something we all want? And then they'll say, oh, there's a monetary concerns. Like, most of that just sounds really bad excuses, but we'll continue with the guy.
Things through public opinion polls. You need people to get involved on a very granular level sometimes. Like, for example, paid family leave. There's different ways to fund that. There's different amounts that can cover, different amounts of months. I agree we need it. It's a very good policy. If you advocate for it properly, it will win. But this goes back to my...
But they never do.
But this goes back to my initial problem.
Why do they never do that?
Who?
Why do the Democrats never fight for a bill at 84%?
I think the Democrats right now are extremely spineless. We don't disagree on that.
All right, good.
But you just
do you know why they're spineless? Because their donors told them to be spineless.
I think they're also very scared.
Because
they're very risk averse.
Brother, let me just tell you this.
Democrats are risk averse. That's the actual problem.
No. I think the real problem is when you're at the top, you don't want anything to.
That's a good kind of point. It's they're risk averse. Though again, he's responding like, again, risk averse is the big problem with them. This is interesting because, again, Cenk's going to bring up and says, why are they risk averse? Because when you are at the top, when things work for you, you are less inclined and less in... Jesus, I am spelling terrible today. I was spelling terrible yesterday, but whatever. Just odd typing position. I like to relax when I'm doing these things, and it leads to less good typing posture. But less incentivized to push for change. Why change things when they work? And we'll put that when they work. This is a massive problem that I do think a lot of leftists, socialists, and other kind of individuals have been correctly pointing out about the system, and about, again, kind of liberals and Democrats, is, again, you're so risk averse, you're so happy with status quo, or so unwilling to risk anything, to break precedent, to set precedent, that, again, it's a who dares wins scenario. And the Republicans, for the past 40, 50 years, have absolutely been perfectly willing to risk things, because they know that the Democrats are just the status quo party. And status quo party doesn't really, even though there is some merit to maintaining the status quo and some good things about it, it is not particularly popular and or nice to the majority of people who, again, because the status quo is designed to have the lessers and the uppers, the haves and the haves not. The have-nots are going to be very upset with the status quo always. So Doesn't matter how risky the Republicans are, how extreme they are, as long as they appeal to the have-nots, and or just generally have the appeal of we're trying to change things, even if their changes are stupid. Just the simple sentiment of we're trying to change things tends to make people like them more than the Democrats who are like, hey, let's go back to normal. And they're like, well, and not necessarily normal, but hey, let's just have some stability.
Change. You want the status quo to remain the same. That is why mainstream media and establishment Democrats and Republicans say civility is the most important thing. Because if you're civil, you don't rock the boat. Why don't they want you to rock the boat? Because it's their boat. Okay.
This is just such an oversimplification.
It is not an oversimplification,
there's the good guys and the bad guys, and we just have to beat
and the
Thanos
results
and
every single time. Do you know that in legislation on the Young Turks, we predict ahead of time what's going to happen? We have nearly 100% track record. You know why? Not because we're geniuses, but because it's super easy. Look at where most of the money is, and that side wins.
So again, is this an oversimplification? I believe it is obviously a simplification, but again, the argument for complexity, Jesus, is itself a distraction and designed to make greater apathy towards understanding. Again, anytime somebody tells you it's super complicated, it's too complicated, blah, 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 it's so complicated, blah, 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 just this constant word salad of complication, and it's so nuanced, there's no way to really get into this. Outside of some specific kind of utility, one of the biggest utilities that this can have, especially from a rhetorical and or political kind of, at least in the history of politics, is that it is usually used in an incredibly cynical way to shut down conversation or to shut down observations that do have merit. And again, this is coming from somebody who's equally angry at Republicans and conservatives for their simplistic, stupid solutions that ignore, again, how things work and how things, there is a degree of complexity, or at the very least, what's a better word than complex? That is more accurate to this. Simply a proliferation and plurality of things that happen. Not necessarily complex in the sense of it is really difficult to understand, because it's actually not. It's just a lot of very basic math for some of the solutions. But oftentimes, again, whenever somebody's arguing, like, again, in the more philosophical and or ideological thing, the argument for complexity is itself an argument that it itself is a dodge in many ways. It's just meant to obscure and prevent any kind of statements being made about anything. Because you could always argue from a semantics and rhetorical standpoint, you can always argue to a point of almost a near incomprehensible complexity. And rarely do people actually want to get into the weeds on that, because once you start doing it, you start realizing that the steps themselves are not particularly complicated. There's just a lot of them.
100% of the time.
Passing legislation that's like very paradigm changing is just super easy? Is that your position?
So things like paid family leave, but again, anything that pulls over 70%.
You agree that's complicated, right?
No, I don't think it's complicated at all.
Where is the funding coming from? How many months are covered?
Yeah, I get it. There's different issues you have to adjudicate.
That's where all the disagreement and negotiation
hold on. Let me answer
Congress.
this. Let me answer this. Okay. So the earlier guy asked, would I?
So here's an interesting thing that I think is a big problem. Is a lot of Democrats have kind of a middle management syndrome, in that anybody who's ever worked with middle upper level management, you realize they are incredibly inefficient and horrible at doing shit and getting shit done because they always want to, again, it's meetings after meetings and meetings to involve new parties to discuss and generalize, well, what are the, well, first we need to have 20 meetings to describe whether or not, how do we delineate what the problem is? And then we'll have 20 minutes, 20 meetings to catch people up who might have missed a few of those meetings on what the problem is. Now, okay, now we know what the problem is. Now, let's do some exploratory things. And are there other problems with this problem, with or problems with our description and understanding of the problem? You end up doing dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings, mostly looking at semantic shit and issues like that. When the reality of the situation is that oftentimes this is just recreating that whole perfect is the enemy of progress kind of paradox, is that your constant search for perfect nuance, perfect understanding of an issue will create a freeze on any progress. You will simply be unable to move forward because you're constantly trying to gather up all 100% of everything, every question, everybody who might be involved in this. And all that sounds really nice. And again, there's a degree to where it is necessary to do that. But the problem is knowing when to simply accept a good enough and move forward, or we need more. Knowing that distinction is really, really difficult. And what ends up happening with a lot of this argument is that how do we structure? Where does the money come? This is where all the arguments come from. It's like, yes, but if you had a functional or you had a functional environment, people would, even if they disagree with where the funding comes from, if they realize that a majority or a greater majority, maybe not a total majority, but a greater percentage of people want to come from A, and you want to come from B, and a couple other people want to come from C, and so there's also some people saying maybe D. The fact of the matter that B, C, and D, they don't just go, okay, look, we're going to go with A. The majority of it seems to like this. Most of us seem to think it might work like that. We're not particularly fond of it. We have our own, I want B, they want C. The fact that you don't do that, even if it isn't perfect, even if it needs to be fixed at a later point, again, this is one of those kind of moments where, like, you will never ever build a house if you're constantly looking for the perfect move every single time. The perfect, like almost a chess move, the perfect building material that does everything forever, once and for all, perfect. We don't ever need to replace this. We don't ever need to worry about this, that. There is lots of investigation you need to do to set the groundwork for this, but the fact that you've had popular sentiment for like paid maternity leave, and other countries have had it for decades, several decades in some instances or more. The fact that the other countries have had single payer and or kind of somewhat Medicare for all, a centralized medical insurance thing for decades and decades, and it's worked relatively well, and they've made changes to it. Sometimes they've made it worse, sometimes they've made it better, oftentimes they make it worse, because conservatives love to make things worse. But the fact of the matter is, like, look, it didn't start off perfect. Their systems never started off perfect. They did their best guess, best exploration. People compromised, especially on the pro side, compromised and then said, okay, yeah, you know what? I still have my concerns on this. I'm still going to be talking about this, investigating. But for now, you have my unquestioning support. I'm going to support this 100%. Once we get it passed, then we're going to see how it works, and I'm going to continue to keep my eyes open for a solution that I think is better. But again, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen because we are so allowed for this. We're so open to this complexity argument, and that, oh well, we need to we need to make sure we get this right. We don't want to mess this up. And again, it has that miserly, I said in the last video, that miserly kind of nature of the Democrats, is that they're so risk averse, they're so miserly with their political capital that they will do nothing with it. Or at least that is very much the sentiment people get. And again, they're so they're so dysfunctional, I think, is the biggest thing, is that they're well intentioned, but like anybody who's ever been in middle management, upper management, I've been in a few of those meetings in academia and the kind of on the administrative side, and the amount of purposeful dysfunction, I would call it purposeful dysfunction, to where either people in the system, I would say systematically it is purposeful, and whether or not the person actually means to do this or not, but their positions and the way they've been trained, the way that their predecessor did their job, the way they have feel their job, and the way they feel like they can contribute is by they can contribute by adding complexity and and questions and that prevent function. We want to make sure this is right, so let's go and look back at this again. Let's do it again. Let's go over this. Let's do this. Let's catch this person up. Let's have we talked to these people. We should probably talk to them because they might have some ideas, even though yeah, sure, they don't really connect to this issue at all, and they aren't going to be using this system at all. But they technically are affected by it downstream after a couple of steps. So maybe we should get their feedback on this as well. It sounds all nice and logical, but again, what this ends up doing is being a dysfunctional system. The dysfunctional work and functions. The function is to create dysfunction. It is constantly working against itself. And again, this is what we have in a lot of the system, is this question of how to structure it. It doesn't matter. And again, this is a bit of an extremist statement because it does actually matter, because yes, it can be extremely disastrous, but unless it is incredibly disastrous, which again, that would be very cynical for you to assume that they're just going to make the dumbest, most disastrous, we're literally just going to, just pull the money out of, like everything, and it's going to be this massive waste. And, it just assumes that in the months and the weeks and months and perhaps even the year leading up to the implementation of this, everyone involved is just stupid, panicky monsters who are just going to go, let's just pull this out, like people in the fire, or like they're going to do the wrong decision. They're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater without even realizing it because they're so panicked and stupid. Like, this just assumes that, oh, well, we can't possibly design something that'll work well in 6 months. Maybe, maybe not. Again, the try is also important. And even if you get a imperfect solution passed that's not working too well, you got it passed and now it's established, which means that you can change things potentially, as long as you just keep working on it. Again, this how to structure it. Again, this is like, you want everything. Like, you want the answer for, well, sure, you want me to have a kid, but how am I going to pay for that kid's college fund right now? How am I going to be able to pay for that kid's wedding? How am I, where is that kid going to live? What kind of kids are my kids going to have? How are we going to be able to plan and control for all of these possibilities? What happens if my kid gets sick before he gets to college, and he can't go to college, he misses out on this, and they reject his application because now he's got an autoimmune disease and he can't attend. What are we going to do with this? Like, all these, like, dude, that's like 20, 30. What do you want the answers for every fucking thing before we move one step forward? This is like, again, well, how are we going to live together? And what if I don't like how she cooks? And you're like, and your buddy's like, your buddy's telling you, like, what if I don't like how she cooks? What if she's not a great wife and a mother? Like, and more importantly, what if she wants to retire in Florida, but I want to retire in Colorado? and you're looking at your buddy like this, dude, you haven't even met her. I just said, hey, she looks kind of pretty, and she's giving you some eyes. Maybe, go chat her up at the bar and see if maybe there's something there. You're worrying about retirement with her and fucking kids and what? You haven't even met her. You haven't even started, motherfucker. That is the frustration that a lot of progressives on the left side, especially, have with Democrats right now, is because Democrats are utterly incapable of moving forward on anything. And Cenk has a bit of conspiratorial thinking, is that, oh, they don't want to, they're just bought and paid for. There's maybe some truth to that, but ultimately I think it's just a middle management syndrome to hell and back again. A lot of well-intentioned people can become utterly useless and fucking just completely useless as human beings and as actors through this disempowering, disjointed nature of the middle management environment.
I bully the politicians. Absolutely. Why? Because I want to bully them and it makes me feel good? No, it's for a purpose, although it's kind of fun. Okay, but it's for a purpose. Brother, if you're voting against 84% of Americans, you're a traitor. You're a traitor to your voters. So why are you, and then I'm asking,
agree on a very nominal, vague representation
I'm asking a question of them. Why are you voting against 84% of the voters? And if you're a Democrat, you're voting against 90% of your voters. If you're a Republican, you're voting against 74% of your voters. I know why you're voting against them, because the donors told you vote against the American people. It is that simple.
Legislation
but you want to
just say a
defend
piece of
politicians for no reason. They're not your friends. They're not your allies.
It's not just a piece of paper that says paid family leave. There's stuff that goes into it that's complicated. Appreciate it. Pleasure to meet you.
Let me pause this real quick. Hold on one second. All right, sorry, I had to answer a quick message real quick.
All right, good to meet you, brother. I like your shirt.
Thank you, people over politics. So I do agree with you that money has a control over politics.
All right, let's see. Counterclaim. What's his counterclaim?
We see super PAC spending. We see Mitch McConnell and longtime figures, 40 years in politics, and I'm pretty sure everyone is just sick of it. I don't agree with on the media half, and I kind of want to explain why. A lot of people don't tune into mainstream media anymore, and I'm sure you know this. You run the
mainstream media not as powerful and influential. So here's my immediate problem with that kind of statement, is that it assumes alternative media is significantly different from mainstream media, which it is only in the sense that it is less responsible and managed in a systemic sense. So there is some degree of freedom in the alternative media space, quite a bit of it, but it suffers even more from the parasocial and what's the word I'm looking for? cult of personality issues. So it becomes even worse on that regard, to where it becomes not just a popularity contest, but a popularity of, as far as entertainment and or blood sports and or cult of personality, to where this then affects and can create popular sentiment for things that are nonsensical and make no fucking sense. And that's kind of where, again, Cenk is actually in a kind of an issue, has a problem here, is that, you know, what people want is oftentimes greatly influenced and affected by the media they consume, and mainstream media will do this, but alternative media does this just as much. And in fact, I would say it's even more insidious because it doesn't have the official thing. The official tag is not applied, which leads people to consume it without reservation and believe that it is entirely like free of big influence, kind of big government or whatever. Like, again, because a media corporation, you know, it has to follow laws and rules and regulations. It's the man, it's them. Whereas my small little 5 million subscriber media conglomerate onto themselves streamer, they're just honest, good, wholesome people. But it's like, yeah, but see, there's twofold. One, they are just as much of a conglomerate as anything else. It's just they don't even have the benefit of having a multiple perspectives that may temper or otherwise give greater nuance to their opinion. Again, they end up just being another, they literally become Donald Trump. Donald Trump is alternative media, even though he's not alternative. He's just, he has zero fucking regulation, which is kind of a bad thing. You do need some degree of regulation. Again, there's power dynamics that are happening here that are complicated. It's not really complicated, just a lot of steps to it. But again, if you're going to make an argument in favor of alternative media being better, that's not really going to be a good thing.
One of the biggest progressive channels on YouTube, but it's hard to see media having this big influence when so many people are tapped out. So I'm kind of wanting to understand why you think it's...
They spent $16 billion at a minimum in this last election cycle. Where did most of that money go? It went to mainstream media, okay? So mainstream media has 16 billion reasons to make sure you don't find out that the donor...
So again, they're not tapped. One argument I would have against him that he's not necessarily doing is they're not tapped out. They are tapped into the media and the infotain. Is that actually a word? Infotainment, basically informative entertainment, which is kind of what we're doing right here. They're more tapped into what I do, even though, again, not a big audience. That's fine. We like it small here. But they're more tapped into what I do and what I'm doing in this very moment right here and what other streamers and reactors do than they are to the mainstream media. But at the same time, it still functions as the same thing because I have my own political and social biases. It's just I have even less kind of filter and control in here, which people might like for the honesty, but it can also lead to just as much stupidity because even, again, most organizations, again, Fox News has been lowering the bar for decades, along with a couple other like CNN and a lot of cable news, lots of 24-hour news. But for the most part, publications, when you publish things, they do have to do some degree of due diligence to check their sources. They can be biased, but as long as they aren't outright lying, they're kind of okay. But they still have to not outright lie. you take stuff like Tim Pool or a lot of the right-wing media, I'm going to point at them, a lot of the right-wing media kind of figures in the alternative media center, and even things like Peter Boghossian and the anti-intellectualist, they lie all the fucking time. And there is very little recourse or repercussions against it. So them not being tapped into mainstream media doesn't really matter. The next thing I would say is that, oh, they're not tapped in mainstream media. A good way to kind of put this out that Cenk is not necessarily going to bring up is that Cenk is talking about how mainstream media receive tons of funding to cover and discuss the issues according to the donor class. But what this actually then also comes down to is you might think, well, okay, well, I'm just going to watch alternative media. But alternative media is still heavily dependent on mainstream sources of info. Again, majority of your stuff, whether it be even stuff like less serious Asmongold React videos or even Hassan Piker, Stephen Bonnell or Destiny, myself, all of us in this sphere, on the YouTube sphere, on the Twitch sphere, on the Kick sphere, on the whatever sphere, the streaming and the React content and all that, we are all reacting to and kind of somewhat dependent upon the generator of things. We generate reaction, but content outside of parasocial kind of weird interdrama bullshit, again, we are still mostly dependent upon our own dependent on a lot of mainstream content or mainstream sources, and then we reutilize them or reuse them in our original content, whether it is reaction content or essay or discourse, whatever content, we use that, and then other people then respond to that content. So this is kind of constant refiltering, reinterpreting, but the actual objects of obsession, of fetishization, if you want to take it into kind of a weird Lacanian thing, these objects of obsession, these cultural objects. We start talking about trans in sports. Why was that just something that was just created out of the alternative media space? Because alternative media, what like somebody in the alternative media space was competing against a transgender individual and wanted to start up? No, this came from mainstream media, i.e. either local news or news that is, again, part of a larger news conglomerate, Fox News, CNN, ABC, CBS, NBC, blah, 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 blah. All those things doing their local kind of news things because there's a reaction in some kind of small-scale social issue, social conflict. That then gets put into the local news. That then is picked up by mainstream news and more people reading in this or reacting to it. Again, the mainstream media environment kind of does this. And then that sets the tone. So then all of a sudden now you'll have 20, 30, 40, 50 panels, arguments over the next 10 years between various degrees of mainstream and alternative media figures, debate bros, whatever you want, you'll have this massive, massive kind of cultural moment about transgendered sports, despite the fact that, for the most part, they are such an insignificant number and they represent such a small kind of thing that even if you think the philosophical question is kind of interesting, like the nature of self-identification, the nature and from the biological and or like a sports sciences kind of approach, most people barely take it that way. They just co-opt the kind of language, but most people aren't even involved in that. And those communities were having those conversations, but then they're informed by the outrage cycle. So this idea that you are free or not going to be influenced by this, again, I would bring this out again. They are just as dependent upon mainstream media, and they're kind of a parasitic relationship. They both respond to each other and create a filter for the average non-content creator to consume.
Money is corrupting. Okay, so now what is the effect of that? So when you see in the 2016 race, for example, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, right? Now, Donald Trump eventually got about $5 billion in free media. And now, to be fair to him, he did a lot of interviews and Hillary decided not to do a lot of interviews. But a part of that was the media's decision. You know how much, before the primaries ended, Trump had already gotten $2 billion in free media, right? Do you know how much Bernie Sanders had gotten? $28 million. About what, I think 1% of what Trump had gotten. They're all at the top. Almost all the anchors are millionaires. And the last thing they want is a left-wing populist who's actually going to make a difference. Oh, fake populists like Trump, no problem. Send in the clowns. Establishment Democrats and Republicans, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, both raised $1 billion from corporate donors and have done exactly what the corporate donors want. They're like, that's great. Let's pump them up. But whenever you got a real challenge to power, mainstream media attacks.
Speaking on the terms of left-wing media, if you consider your networks like, I guess MSNBC, if we're going to classify that as left, CNN kinda. I don't think these are the type of networks that would completely destroy and eviscerate a liberal candidate. Think about someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Think about somebody like Jamie Raskin. If they were going to be in a primary, I don't think that you're going to see a whole smorgasbord.
It's interesting that they say this because, again, one of the counters that I might bring that's somewhat more recent, again, it kind of depends on when this was filmed, I don't know, but this idea that, well, liberal left media or mainstream media, kind of the liberal mainstream media would be nicer to the leftist. That's kind of the question here, and the general thing is not really. And a great kind of example of this, because Mamdani, the amount of attention that was given to Mamdani, but the amount of attention that kind of came, even when it was positive, there's kind of this weird backhanded, like, wow, it's really shocking and surprising how popular he is, but he's a really radical candidate. I mean, there's some things about him that are really radical. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but it's really surprising how such a radical, crazy thing is getting support here. I don't know. This is really shaking it up. They're so shocked, and that part of that shock helps to sell the narrative that this guy is shocking, that he is strange and terrible. And it's just like, yeah, but is he strange or terrible? Is he only strange and terrible compared to the quote-unquote established norm? And the established norm is so fucking disconnected from what most common sense people might suggest is, well, yeah, that's not an extreme position to hold. And again, maybe Mamdani does have some extremist aspects to him, but they weren't particularly positive towards him. And they certainly gave tons and tons of airtime to virtually any and every single stupid smear that was thrown his direction. And he hasn't won mayoral or anything like that. He just was winning he just won the primary for the Democratic Party. Doesn't mean he's necessarily going to win mayorship. And again, from the politician side, maybe not necessarily from the populist side, from the population, but from the politician side, the fact that, again, the response by most of the politicians were not particularly positive towards Mamdani, except for a few that were all like AOC and Bernie Sanders to some degree. But like the fact that Andrew Cuomo is still trying to run, and he's just going to run as an independent, like, and some people, like, again, the fact that mainstream media isn't having at least a half a dozen panels talking about, wow, what a piece of shit record. God damn, we hate this dude. Like, they will talk endlessly about Bernie Sanders splitting the vote, about other people splitting the vote against the Democrats or whatever. But when a Democrat, established Democrat, is splitting the vote and kind of being a wrecker for a more left-wing Democrat candidate, all of a sudden now it's kind of like, well, you know, he's allowed to run and he can run as independent, and, you know, I have my reservations, and, you know, Cuomo's still a really good ally to the Democratic Party. I don't know, like, maybe we should talk about something else. Let's talk about Trump. It's easier to talk about Trump. That's really an interesting problem that I've seen.
Or just go after them right now. I'm pretty sure you would have seen CNN or MSNBC's coverage tilt favorably towards them compared to someone like Donald Trump if they would have been nominated in this type of election.
That's actually not true. MSNBC is the biggest opponent of progressive populist in the Democratic Party. Whenever, like when Bernie was about to win after he won the first 3 states in 2020, then they sent out Chuck Todd, Chris Matthews, and others to say if Bernie wins, he's a communist that'll start executions in Central Park. He said, that's what Chris Matthews said. Chuck Todd.
And see, let's check this. Chris Matthews said if the Russians, Reds, and the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park. He then said he doesn't know whether Bernie Sanders is a red socialist or a Denmark socialist. So again, Cenk is maybe stretching this a little bit, but it certainly is not a far stretch. Again, if I were to say, you know, if, you know, when socialist and communist Fidel Castro got into power, he executed everybody. And Mamdani says he's a socialist, but I don't know if he's a Castro socialist or a Denmark socialist. It does seem to like I'm giving you this fear mongering, like, wow, do we want to risk putting the wrong type of socialist involved? Because that's such an extreme risk. Either we get a Denmark socialist or we get executions in the street. That sounds terrible. Yeah, this is even if he's slightly misquoting, I think he still has the general heart and point of the Chris Matthews quote, which is pretty awful.
Talked about his followers being brown shirts. I said in the beginning of that campaign, the people in power will be so opposed to Bernie that by the end they'll call him anti-Semitic. And they called him anti-Semitic, okay, even though he's Jewish. So on AOC, no one covered her in mainstream media before her historic primary win. We covered her 34 times.
Again, nobody, yeah, I do. I'm not sure if I know that for 100%, but I don't remember AOC getting a lot of attention until she won. But that might be my own bias. So I am tentatively agreeing with his assessment on this. But AOC does get some positive coverage, but it's kind of like this patronizing positive coverage that, like, well-meaning but useless, stupid people. Kind of like the same thing like Bernie Sanders. Like, oh, we all love Bernie Sanders because he seems like he's got a good heart. AOC's got a good heart, and she's trying to put it in the right place. But they're just silly, stupid children thinking socialism and all that stuff would work. You know, so we pat them on the head and say, good kids, vote along what we say, and we'll maybe throw you a bone or a scrap here and there. That's honestly a lot of the positive coverage of AOC, is that it is either milk toast, she's doing good Democrat stuff, yeah, yes, queen, you go girl, feminism wins, kind of half-assed kind of praise. Or it which itself is somewhat patronizing, or it is just kind of that patronizing, you know, like, yeah, you know, I believe that they really want to help the people. They're just so so utterly out of their depth, and their policies could never possibly work, and it's just so unfeasible. But I appreciate the sentiment. You know, it's the thought that counts.
So the reason for that is because, yes, some parts of media now are better, to your original point. Independent media is better. For all its problems and warts and et cetera, it's at least opening up the discussion to more free thought and getting people thinking. But mainstream media has you inside these tiny guardrails, and the minute you step outside of it, and populist left always steps out of it and says, why don't we deliver for the American people? I'll give you one last example. Those guys attack. So when Biden went to do student debt relief, Stephanie Ruhle did so Fox News did segments on it, against it, CNN did segments against it, and then Stephanie Ruhle on MSNBC did a segment against it, because that's an economic issue. The minute it's an economic issue, they all circle the wagons, and they play good cop, bad cop, and they all say no.
Pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, brother.
I kind of wish he got a little bit more talking. He seemed fairly respectful. I kind of wish he got a next comment in there, but Cenk does kind of bull rush the conversation. But again, if you want to have this, like, sadly with the format here, you have to be rude and interrupt. That's the only way to get comments in. You cheater. I saw that. Goddamn, there's way too many cheaters in here. You getting up. You got up and started moving before we even got to go. Everyone else is playing fair.
Nice to meet you.
And nice
How dare you? Cheater. I'm joking. I don't give a shit.
to meet you.
So I think I really want to focus a lot on the media part with you, just because mainly
All right. Ah. Okay. I gotta reset my hands here. That's all right. All right. Focus on the media part. Everyone's going to focus on the media part. All right. Money part, everyone agrees with probably, or to some degree agrees with, but the media part they don't want to agree with. All right.
for the fact that I think we can all unbiasedly agree that, let's be honest, Trump during his whole election campaign, it was very anti-Trump, very pro-Democrat, and how he was the absolute just most terrible thing that could happen if he gets.
So again, MSM was anti-Trump and was biased. And again, I believe that is, I'm sorry, with the way his first term went and his second term, I think mainstream media in this sense, again, the broken clock is right twice kind of sentiment, even though I actually don't think a broken clock is ever right. It's never right, by the way. Just generally, philosophically, mathematically, whatever you want, objectively, the broken clock is never right. But mainstream media, like looking at Trump's kind of first term and the beginning of his second term, yeah, the mainstream media is right to say that he's going to be like the worst thing since, the plague.
Voted in as basically a threat to our democracy. And so when it comes to that and everything, let's be honest, very high percentage was very negative towards him. How can you explain the outcome if the media controls everything?
So that would be kind of thing. So how can you explain Trump 2016 if the media controls sentiment and politics? If the media was so against Trump. Now this kind of misses a couple of points. I would put it on my own kind of thing. Kind of the logic of this argument again is media controls all politics. Media was heavily against Trump. Trump should not have won. But Trump did win, so that would make some of those premises not true. So again, we're kind of going onto a semantic argument of all politics and the degree thing. So we have a degree argument here. But beyond that, I would also then bring up is that not all media was anti-Trump. box, I do believe, was relatively positive towards him. And he represents the dark side of populism and what happens when politics and the controls in place ignore the popular sentiment for too long. Again, he is a populist candidate, and he represented a destruction and or anti-system, anti-status quo. People weren't voting for him based on anything else other than the fact that he was anti-status quo. Everything else that's after this, like, oh, I really liked his policy on this or that, or I was really agreeing with this. Honestly, that's all ad hoc, post hoc justifications for why they voted him. The primary reason they voted for him, from the emotional, sentimental kind of thing, the reason why I grabbed it, is because he was populist in the sense he was anti-establishment. He was an angry lightning rod. He was an angry, disrespectful lightning rod to extremely established figures, and people really just wanted, again, that's why I often say, again, people who support him, they love bullying. I've made this mention before, that a lot of conservative ideology is based around just kind of anger, hate, and bullying, and that's kind of where this goes, is that they weren't looking for construction, they were looking for deconstruction, they were looking for destruction.
Everything when it comes to elections and politics.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and so one I get asked often. So when you talk about money in politics, it controls almost all the races, but the ones that are the smallest, it controls the most, because there's almost no media coverage of a Montana congressional race. So whoever has more money wins. In fact, in congressional races, whoever has more money wins 95% of the time. But the one giant exception is...
So, small races and the majority of the Senate and House and local politics is controlled by most money. And I do believe that is relatively true. And again, there's kind of a break point, like, just because you had more money doesn't necessarily always mean you won, especially if their monies are relatively equal. So if you have somebody who had $5 million in media blitz funding and somebody who had like 4.5 or 4 million, again, the amount is high enough and the coverage is enough that you're going to see this breakdown. But if you have somebody who has $2 million in advertisement across the board and somebody who had like 20,000 or 50,000, and it was only, again, that's when there's enough of a push that it usually lands on there. But yeah, it's not, I don't know if it's the constant majority or all of them, but I do believe that it is a strong enough majority, or it's a strong enough correlation that we can derive some meaning of the more money you have, the more likely you are, or have at your disposal for your campaign, the more likely your campaign is to be successful.
Is presidential races, because there's so much free media in presidential races and everyone is paying attention. So you could actually go the route of going into media yourself and making your own argument. That's why I thought Trump would win in 2016. That's why I was really worried about it in 2024, because Democrats have become like corporate talking point robots, the establishment Democratic politicians. So they don't like to engage with Joe Rogan or these other folks. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're giving away billions of dollars in free media. Trump had the right strategy. But at the end of the day, because he was all over media and he got billions of dollars in extra media coverage, that is part of the reason why he won.
While media has influence and everything else.
And again, also one thing I would add to this, on my own sense, is that especially with figures that are anti-social, anti-status quo, shakers up, and who kind of follow that brand of being a bully, bastard, highly critical, highly inappropriate. Again, negative press is as positive for them, as positive press. Again, there's no such thing as bad press for these people, because no matter what, again, what MSNBC is going to say that he was a bully and a rude, disgusting pig of a human being against Hillary Clinton and other people. That's what people like about him. People are like, yeah, sure, okay, maybe this one he was a little bit rough, but I mean that kind of energy is what I want. And yeah, when you have that energy, you're gonna end up with maybe a little bit dirty. You're gonna end up with a couple of faux pas here and there, but I'm willing to let those slide for the greater action. Again, that would be a big thing with Trump, is that Trump, because of the way he is, negative press doesn't work against him. At least the type of negative press that was frequently utilized against him. It just doesn't work. They don't care.
It still comes down to the individuals to vote. So whenever it comes down to that, then how can you explain they still have control, even though at the end of the day, it's still the individual's right and the individual's ability to go vote and make
because
their voice
how does
heard.
anything ever get into your head? So like when you go into a voting booth, you see names, right? But if you never saw that person and you never heard their name because they didn't have enough money for ads and the media didn't cover it, that person has no chance of winning. It's like there's a mythology in mainstream
Right, but with
media
the
that
access
two
that we-
people go
but with the
into
access
an
that we
octagon
have-
and then people
but with the
decide
access
which
that we
one is
have-
better, right?
Again, you say like this, but people are influenced by what they see and hear, and media makes up the majority of that content. And it kind of makes up, I would not just say makes up, and dictates the majority of that content.
But
That's
the fact
not
that
how
we
it
have
actually
access
works.
to be able to see all of these things. Nice to meet you.
All right.
She got voted out too quickly.
Hey, nice to meet you. Kyle?
Yeah, so I think money doesn't necessarily have a
Okay, so counterclaim. What do we got?
mind, so I'd like to kind of take it to who's making the decisions on how to allocate the capital. And so does party loyalty here play at all, right? Like at the end of the day, you're going to have politicians who can influence where that capital is coming from. And if you're towing the party line, saying what they want you to say, that to me seems more impactful than the ability to go and find donors yourself to raise a significant capital to win a race.
So let me give you a couple of examples. So Ted Cruz got $13 million from the Mercer family when he was running for president in 2016.
Sure.
If you remember, Donald Trump insulted his wife, so at the Republican National Convention, Ted Cruz did not endorse him. So, but right afterwards, he's changed his mind and started phone backing for Donald Trump. What happened in between? What happened in between is after his speech, he went up to the suites that the Mercer family had at the convention, and they slammed the door in his face. And they said, we now have a new guy that we're picking. It's like the Hunger Games. So the sponsors decided that they were going to go with Donald Trump now. So Ted Cruz, realizing I'm going to lose my donor money if I don't do as I'm told, said, I'm so sorry. And then he grabbed the phone and was like, oh yeah, Donald Trump is the best. Forget about my wife. Who cares about her? Why? Because he's going to seek the donor money.
So again, donors have this kind of thing. Donors have the final say, is what he's saying right here. Even if the party can sometimes direct them. Again, the party has the ability, unless there is a known and acknowledged kind of perspective amongst the donor class that exists prior to the party's directives, the donor class will follow the party's recommendation. So again, it's kind of like a consulting firm, if you will, is that the final say is with the people who have the power and the money and whatever, but unless they have a specific acknowledged perspective and or desire, want prior to this or in response to this to some degree, or they don't feel strongly one way or the other, they may go with
all right, I have these ideas and policies I don't care who you get to do this or whatever. I want them passed. And then the party could say, okay, well, support these guys. We have these guys right here. They'll help you get it passed. Donor party goes, okay, sure. But if the donor party has, I want these policies and I know this guy wants to do this, and then the party says, well, hold on, but what about this guy? The donor class may ultimately say, no, we want this guy. And so the party goes, okay, I guess we will go with that guy instead of the guy we picked out. That's kind of the sentiment there.
But you can do it on both sides. Look, we have Mo Brooks, for example, is a Republican who was running for Senate in Alabama. And he gave a speech where he said, look, in order to become a chairman of a committee, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you have to raise $1 million. But you cannot raise it from John and Jane Doe. So you raise it from the industry you're supposed to be regulating with the implicit promise that you do not regulate them and you give them whatever you want. So in order to be a committee chairman, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you must take what is a campaign contribution, but really a bribe from that industry and make sure you protect that.
I think
industry.
it's a cynical view that the
Yes, it is, and it's true.
Again, the general response to all of these things is cynical view. And again, this is not untrue. This is a fairly cynical true and perhaps too cynical and myopic. Why can't I ever spell for myopic? Why do I? There we go. Myopic. But there is ample evidence to suggest that this is not unrealistic and does happen more than is good.
Again, I think what we're talking about is to what degree does the political structure
Again, like everything here is that cynical and cynicism, the argument seems to be, again, just a degree argument.
and government structure just enable, right? Like, I don't think like a claim around Republicans only caring about the poor, or not caring about the poor, only caring about the rich. Are they just acknowledging the practical reality of in order to facilitate a successful race, you have to raise capital, so you have to please donors? So they're not
So when
evil,
do we
they're
ever
not-
get pleased? Like, they don't need to be evil. They don't need to be
Yeah.
evil. They could just be like, hey, I want status. I want to be a senator. So I'm going to take 13 million here, 10 million there, et cetera. And then I'm going to serve the donors. Yeah, you could say it's necessary, but that's why this system sucks. That's why we need
So
to
I guess
change it
what would
and
the
get
sol-
money out of
the sol-
politics. If you get money out of politics, then they have to serve the voters and be our representatives instead of the representatives of the donors.
In terms of the solutions here, though, money will always play a role in politics. Is there a practical reality where you think money is not going to play a role in?
So between 1938 and 1978, bribery was illegal. And in that 40 years, we built the greatest middle class the world
Money
has
will
ever
always
seen.
play-
Was our
hold
system
on.
perfect?
And here's the interesting thing. Again, the response is money will always play a part in politics. And that's kind of true, but in many ways, that is itself equally cynical. It's just, oh, well, it's just practical. And somewhat not true, or at least it accepts all the damage done as natural. Again, the big thing is that a lot of things such as, like, again, Citizens United, certain rulings that have allowed and increased the amount of money that can go into politics, that can go into PACs, that can go into these kind of systems of, again, bribery, that has increased and changed and become much more legitimized. Like, money has always existed in politics, but it was usually one of the things that had to, again, if somebody mentioned, oh, by the way, this senator took $1 million from Carnegie Steel, that might be, again, that would be like, front page news, senator found to have been accepting donations and bribery, even though technically it might not be bribery. It's like, oh, no, I just accepted this as like a donation to my campaign. Again, the general sentiment, people would be like, no, this was corrupt and horrible. And people would be talking about like, how dare you do this? Even though, yes, everyone's doing it, but they have to do it behind closed doors. What we've allowed that kind of thing to become naturalized and not behind closed doors. And now we have this next little problem. And now it creates this kind of problems where, again, if there is no reason to fear this, if there's no reason to hide this anymore, it just kind of becomes a free-for-all to where everybody can do it to the greatest extent. There is no need to hide it.
No, but productivity went way up, and so did wages.
You're assuming money
in
has to kind of change
1978,
hands.
the Supreme Court.
It doesn't have to come in the form of bribery.
Yeah, campaign contributions
What I'm
when
saying
they're
is,
coming from corporate donors
if you're
are
pissing
bribery.
off rich donors, they can still pour money into media campaigns to influence the outcomes of the elections. So, like money, practically speaking, I just don't see how you ever get to a point where money is not at all influential in a political race.
Yes, so don't give up hope. So can you do it? Of course you can, because we had it. We had it between 38 and 78. We did, and it led to the greatest middle class. It led to the best economy.
To what degree did social media exist in that period of time?
So
like,
but social media is better.
So again, I would certainly say that this is a bad argumentation line from this dude right here. Is that, well, one, it's immediately a cynical, hopeless, we can't possibly do it like this. Yeah, but we could make it harder. Again, this is kind of acceptance of the status quo. Again, we could make it harder, would be a fair argument to have here, is that it doesn't have to. Again, this weird rolling over playing dead as they further erode any of the ethics committees and ethical and maybe moral, but certainly ethical kind of guidelines, because they do exist. Like there are rules and regulations on behavior. It's just between the Republican Party and the Democrats' kind of acquiescence to this and the desperate need to protect whatever the status quo is. Doesn't matter if the status quo changed from one year to the next year, we're just always protecting it. So as it goes down, the status quo people protect the status quo and maintain that new low, and then the bar gets dropped a little bit lower, and then they protect the status quo of that bar while it stays there, while other people work to lower it. And if they're successful in lowering it, now the status quo people will protect that new status quo, and they won't try to return to original status quo, wherever that was. And again, this kind of refusal to accept that there is anything that we can do to stop this is again part of the narrative that it allows. Like technically, and this is kind of the fun little trick that so much has kind of been done to us, is that we say the vote is the most powerful thing because it allows us to vote in the government, but the government should be more powerful than any one corporation or even all the corporations combined. Doesn't matter how big they are, that government, when it comes to how that corporation operates within that nation, the government of that nation has ultimate power. Which is why, the vote is so important, and, our representatives. But god damn it, if we aren't just fucking bending over backwards and becoming the best bitch we can for literally Amazon, Apple, and virtually every other dick sucker in the $100 billion class. And it's just like, no, we can't do this. Oh, they'll take their business elsewhere. Technically, they might try to, but it also is somewhat kind of weak-willed and pathetic. It's like, no, they don't want to lose the American market. They can't afford to lose the American market. So you can bully them far more. Yes, there might be a point, but goddamn, are we just unwilling to bully these corporations into doing anything that is good for the American people? It's weirdly cynical and kind of just spineless again.
The mainstream media.
But you're taking a historical period where today.
So you're saying just give up. Don't even try to take donor money out.
I'm saying there are things that you can make progress on today, but I'm saying practically speaking,
I think you can get a constitutional amendment. You know why I think you can get a constitutional amendment to get money out of
I don't really like this practical thing because it doesn't make any sense. It's this thrown out word. Well, we gotta, sure, we can try to do these things, but, from a practical sense, like, well, yeah, from a practical sense, that is also, it is practical to want to do this. It is practical to want to go out and make sure that the donor money is restricted and that something like this is not impractical or practical. And I'm not even saying I'm a pro or against this. I'm just saying that, like, from just a basic rhetorical linguistic standard, like a logical standard, there's nothing that denotes this as not practical. It's just this weird buzzword you throw out there to try to make it sound like this is just unrealistic fantasization, which it's just not.
Constitutional amendment.
Because 93% of Americans believe that politicians
What
represent their
does
donors
that mean?
and not their voters.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
No.
You cheated. Cheater!
Hey there.
We've met a long time ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, you look familiar.
So on the local level, right? LA City Council.
Hold on. We got to get our counterclaim up. Counterclaim. Local level. All right. What are we looking at the local level?
Could upzone everything. Let construction companies, property management companies come in, wholesale develop, build massive apartment buildings, run these properties, right? LA City Council has not done that. Are you saying development companies, real estate companies, and property management companies are not moneyed interests?
I'm not quite sure what he means by that. Are real. Jesus. That was terrible. Real estate and developers, not moneyed interests. Is he somehow suggesting that that these entities would want to develop and build, and they would pressure councils to allow them to do so. Again, this also is somewhat deceptive because, again, I think, as much as I hate to say this, I do think this oversimplifies that kind of dynamic, but it also kind of misses that, yes, there are different moneyed interests. So just because one moneyed interest wants this doesn't mean all moneyed interests want this. So you could have two moneyed interests that are opposed to each other. So there might be a moneyed interest that doesn't want real estate and developers to develop things. And it also ignores the fact that part of the reason is that there's also equal number of real estate and developers who have already developed who don't want any more competition. So you might be going, well, why wouldn't you're saying Intel wouldn't isn't asking to build a factory in LA, but Intel wants to make more chips and wants that and needs that factory to make more chips. It's like, yes, that could be, but the problem might be is that AMD already built their factory 10 years ago and they don't want competition. They got their factory. So they are going to the council and going, don't approve these things. Intel is going to ruin the market and ruin your city. So you can have multiple competing moneyed interests.
Amazing that you picked that example. There's two industries that are the most impactful on local and state races. It's utility companies and real estate companies. So real estate companies totally own New York and California, even though they're Democratic. So Andrew Cuomo, when he was governor, passed a whole bunch of things. There were tax breaks for real estate companies, and it didn't help the average person at all. In California, we raised $24 billion to help the homeless. and homelessness went up 53%. Why? Because they do things like, oh no, we're going to have more affordable housing. And then they build high rises that are for super rich people. And then you don't get the affordable housing and homelessness goes up.
They don't build, because if you live on a block of single family housing, okay, and city council makes it so that next to your house, some company could come in, destroy it, build a huge apartment complex on your block, people hate it.
Ah, they don't build. I think this guy's an abundance dude. Basically, abundance is kind of an anti-regulation new movement. Anti-regulation says that the reason they don't build is because it is so hard to do so. Again, I am not particularly fond of the abundance argument. One of these aspects in the deregulation argument, because it does always comes back to deregulation, but then you don't get anything out of that deregulation. It's not necessarily that it's 100% wrong, is that it is difficult to build, but that's not usually why they don't build. The reason they don't build is because it's profitable to maintain the supply at a very low level.
NIMBYism is real. No one wants that on their block.
Again, no one wants that on their block. Again, this is also pushing the problem onto the people, which has merit, but also ignores that these people have been conditioned by media and moneyed interests, would be one response. Also, the next thing you would also respond with the whole NIMBY kind of argument is, while this is somewhat true, it also, again, just ignores the dozens of times when it's not true. There's lots of instances when it's just not true.
And city council doesn't want to freak out their voters. Like, there's this thing called like politics where they don't want to massively upset people, so they don't rock the boat. And it's just and the homeowners aren't giving any money. Like, real estate developers are not the little guy, and they're not getting their way.
Yeah. So it's
But they are. Again, this also kind of just understands, like, again, would they want this? Sure, but at the same time, it's also one of those things where, like, they don't need to develop more. It would be fun and nice for them to develop more and develop larger, bigger kind of things, but they don't want to develop these low-income houses. They don't. They're not as profitable. They don't do this. That's, again, I would really argue that against the abundance thing is that from everything that I've read and everything that I've encountered, they don't want to build low-income housing. Not really. The only time they want to do that is when it's low income, then they immediately try to drag it up into high income. There's no intention on keeping it low income, and there's no reason to do so. Why would we? Why would you? And again, it's this weird kind of, it's almost, again, this beaten wife syndrome, to where now you're creating this logic to try to explain away why this bad stuff is happening to you, and instead of looking at the actual cause of these problems, you're now trying to blame it on the kids.
It's interesting that you picked that example, because I actually have personal experience with that through someone that works at TYT. They ran for city council. As I said earlier, it's easier for progressives to win at city council level because it's a smaller group of people and you can knock on doors, and that's what she did. So that's why sometimes the city councils are better, certainly better than the national guys, etc. But when her experience was, when she went in, the real estate interests were massively powerful. She fought against them. It was in the middle of LA, and eventually they cared so much about getting her out that they started funding someone to make sure she's removed from the city council. But real estate has massive interest.
But what's the money on the other side of not building?
So, no.
Again, this actually is a fundamental misunderstanding of a lot of it, is that a lot of times, depending on the state or whatever, you can make more money
building something, but then not having any occupants in it. I'm trying to remember. I think it's what I can't remember if it's a state ordinance or like a city ordinance kind of thing here, or some kind of general thing. But by building and then not having it occupied, I'm trying to remember how they would do this, but they could basically write off their building and the lack of occupancy as kind of a loss on their tax thing. So they ended up making technically a little bit more money, or equally as much money, by having non-occupancy, basically apartment structures. And they ended up paying and basically making more money because they could write it off as a tax loss, as a loss on the business, because they don't have occupancy. So they don't necessarily, the way it's structured right now, developers don't really need people to occupy their houses or their apartments. And oftentimes they don't even need them to fucking buy it. Yes, real estate, the smaller real estate agencies might need to do it, but the big, larger kind of larger developers and whatnot, they oftentimes don't actually need to sell jack shit, because it's a asset to which they borrow against, whether it's occupied or not. So again, this seems to take this very simplistic, well, the only way they would make money if they have renters in there, so why wouldn't they want to build more things to make more money off the rent? It's just missing the point that, again, they've already asked themselves that question. They addressed that question 100+ years ago. Developers aren't stupid. Real estate landowners are not stupid. They know, well, okay, what are my profits come from? My profits come from, again, people renting. Well, what if people don't rent my apartments? What if I want to make as much money as possible by being cheap on maintenance and building crappy Roach Motel style apartments? It's cheaper than cheaper for me to develop that, and I can charge, and then I charge really high rent. That makes me a lot of profit, but people stop moving in. So the grand kind of ultimate holy grail for real estate, for any kind of capitalist business, is to do one very important thing, is to separate themselves from the need of supply and demand, is to separate themselves from the need to produce. If you can make money without producing anything, without selling anything, if I can completely and utterly kind of subvert that necessary matrix, that necessary aspect, if I could just make money by existing, that is the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate way. Again, profits are the difference between energy and resources put in, and resources and energy taken out or given. So you put in a certain amount of energy, resources into the product, and then you get a certain amount of energy and or resources in the form of monetary compensation for when people buy your product or get the thing, the service, whatever. The real goal is to get as much out of the, to get as much money with as little as put in, and putting in nothing, that's infinite profit. That is the holy grail. And again, they've known this for decades. So this idea that they somehow haven't been working towards, this idea that every business isn't working towards, or especially real estate and whatnot, isn't working towards somehow trying to monetize loss, to make it so that I am not so wholly dependent upon renters and people buying my product, that I can make money and make profit and cover the bills and do all that without needing to do any of that. So that then anything else that's on top of that, that's just icing on the cake. That's just gravy. If I can cover the basics, the major function of this without doing anything, that's awesome. And again, they've gotten to that. A lot of them have gotten to that point.
Oh, there is no, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why real estate almost always wins. You're saying, no, sometimes at the local level, real estate interests don't win. Yes, because very rarely, because it's such smaller percentage of people voting, you can get progressives in there that block that because they're not representing the donor interests. But even in places like LA, they eventually get overwhelmed by the money that real estate guys bring in. And that's, I literally...
Yeah, I don't really like that argument. I would take the secondary argument is that, again, this is fundamentally misunderstanding how they make money. There are, and again, they still make the majority of their money from renters and buyers and whatnot, but they make enough through other ways, and they're able to profit off of what would normally be seen as loss of empty apartments, empty houses. They're able to mitigate those losses to such a degree, oftentimes through, again, tax breaks, claiming the loss on their taxes, through other subsidization and governmental programs that they can say, hey, I'm making these things for these things, please help us for building this and doing this stuff, blah, 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 all that kind of shit. They're able to find, because they're clever, and they have a lot of money to throw at this problem to find the solutions, they're able to make it work.
have personal experience with what happened in LA in that regard.
I want to move to media. Don't you think, especially with alternative media?
All right, so we're moving to media, eh? All right. Counterclaim. Media and alternative media. God help me, he's going to somehow say alternative media is breaking the power structure.
Media, people, creators, like, chase the audience, and they try to be as outrageous as possible to, like, because, I don't know, outrage sells, and audience capture is a huge thing.
It is,
so they're
yeah.
running around chasing audiences. It's not money coming up top down. It's like bottom up. People are angry, want dissent, like disagreement.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that, brother. So there's a giant distinction between mainstream media and now online and independent media. So as I said earlier, online and independent media has at least got people thinking, and it's a wide range of opinions, and I greatly prefer it. Mainstream media does not care, and it doesn't do the thing you're talking about. What it does is it says no.
So I would disagree to a certain extent. I think this is misunderstanding media thing. Hold on. I don't know why. Yeah. Sorry, my microphone was in there. I didn't see the caps lock was on. I think Cenk is wrong here. And not quite understanding, again, the nature of this is that it is a cyclical system, is that both kind of have some degree of influence to a certain degree, but again, that audience's consuming habits is dictated. Again, alternative media is certainly challenging this to a certain degree, but it's more of an Ouroboros kind of situation to where the population is consuming what the population is consuming, which is what the population is consuming. And that's why you end up with basically a near functionally fucking insane political discourse that is generally nonsensical, like, again, what we're seeing with MAGA, is because these people are consuming the most insane, conspiratorial, parasocial, rage-inducing stupidity that has no direction or understanding about anything. So I do not agree with Cenk on here that alternative media is necessarily better. It's just a different poison.
Oh, Joe Manchin is a moderate. Mitch McConnell oftentimes is considered a moderate, etc. That's nonsense.
You think
they do nothing but lies to get you to vote for corporate politicians on the Democratic and Republican side.
Alternative media is helping our politics? You think it generates better
alternative media is much better than mainstream media. Mainstream media says no. I'm sorry that I keep going back to it because it's such an obvious and stark case.
I really do not agree with this at all. Again, I think the best case you could make for Cenk right here is that they are equally toxic and terrible in different ways. That's the best I could say. But again, I don't think alternative media is at all better. I think it is slightly more populist, which, again, he's a populist thing, so he loves populism. But I think the lack of any kind of controls and the lack of anything that again, you have flat earthers, you have anti-vax. This is all alternative media driven, almost exclusively. All of these trends that have become so popular in the past 20, 30 years, it's all alternative media created, almost exclusively. So again, just like that's there, we have so many new evils and anti-intellectual evils in this world that become popular through this entertainment structure. That it's just Cenk is just wrong here.
On paid family leave, the 16% they call moderates, like Manchin and the Republicans that block it. The 84% that want it, they go, oh, radicals. No, progressives like Bernie Sanders are radicals. But they're total giant liars.
Who's still watching CNN to get their political opinions?
A lot of people, older voters, over 70-year-olds.
But you're not acknowledging the whole, like, there's so many people not paying attention to those channels anymore.
And again, even if it's not mainstream media, again, I think Cenk is just stuck in this mainstream media aspect and is ignoring a lot of the alternative media problem. Which again, I don't think actually defeats his argument. I think if he expanded it out a little bit, he would realize that the alternative media is the exact same problem of mainstream media, or very similar. But let's continue.
And that's a great thing. That's why after the Trump election, I said, at least we're out of the establishment prison.
But it's not
we're in the populist woods, and there are things that go bump in those woods. I know, not everybody, you're not going to get all the hosts you want. You're not going to get all the opinions you want. You're not even going to get truth all the time. In fact, most of the time, you're not even going to get truth from the right and sometimes even from the left, okay? So, but what you're going to get is a wide range of opinions, and at least you get to make that decision instead of mainstream media shoving it down your throat. All right, thank you, brother.
Oh wow, they're slow on the draw there. Very slow. You guys all think this poor guy, he's just too slow. You need to be speedier. All right, so we got 2 more minutes. Let's see what we got here. The final counterclaim.
Glad I got to come back up.
All right, great.
So you made an interesting claim. It's very hard to disagree with media and money control all of politics. It's more so who controls the money. When President John Kennedy passed Executive Order number 11110, which began the process of abolishing the Federal Reserve, which we know is a private institution, he was mysteriously assassinated a couple months after that. So the question is that the money powers of the world, they have a monopoly.
Okay, so we got some JFK conspiracy. All right. Moneyed interests. What else we got?
Over the things that we use to transmit and receive information. So my question to you is, how exactly do you combat such a machine that has been in existence since mankind has been on the planet?
Yeah, that's why I mentioned 1938 to 78, because when
and again, just general impossible and natural force that cannot be contained except through the power of Jesus Christ. I'm almost certain that's just, again, he is probably a Christian nationalist to some degree. I hate to say that, but he's a conservative and he's highly Christian, and he's wearing a suit. He's probably a Christian nationalist. Again, my prejudice is leaking through here, but it's, I don't know. You bat 100% average when you just go with that. But let's see. Again, he's bringing up the 1930.
When you make it illegal, it's much harder to do the bribes. It's not that today people don't get bribed. They do, but it's more rare, right? But in 76 and 78, the Supreme Court had 2 decisions that basically said corporations are people and they have a right to spend unlimited money on politics. When they did that, one of the dissenting justices, Justice White, said, "You just killed our democracy." And that's exactly what happened. Now, theoretically, you could overturn the Supreme Court, but you're not going to overturn this Supreme Court that is massively pro-corporate. That's why I'm saying you need to do an amendment to go above the Supreme Court, but you can, and that's why I started Wolfpack. If you get money out of politics, if you say in this Constitution in a way that the Supreme Court cannot overrule, these people cannot buy our politicians, that is the answer. We can get back to a time where it created great growth in this country, and most of the earnings went to the middle class. Do you know that after those Supreme Court decisions, productivity still skyrocketed, but wages flatlined? And the difference was $12 trillion that they stole from the average American, went to corporate executives instead of going to the average guy.
That sounds fantastic. I'm not disagreeing with that, but what I'm asking you is, you are talking about fundamentally restructuring the entire political system, which will require, frankly, Thomas Jefferson said once that the tree of liberty has to be watered from time to time with the blood of tyrants and patriots. Money has obviously integrated itself into the Supreme Court, into the Congress houses, into the White House even, with all the money that President Trump did lose in the election, because he lost, to quote him, he lost billions of dollars. But he also was donating billions of dollars. If we don't have, right now, do you have a populist candidate that we as the people should be supporting? Who's the candidate?
So we're going to see that through the system, the primaries, et cetera. But Jon Stewart's amazing. Ro Khanna's amazing.
And how much money have they gotten from corporate donors?
So Ro Khanna does not take any money from corporate donors. If you're going to be in Rebellion PAC, you're not allowed to take corporate PAC money. Okay. So there's a way to do it that way, get enough of the legislators that are honest. And by the way, there are some Republicans who are now not taking corporate PAC money. Thomas Massey, Josh Hawley.
But if they're not taking
that's the road to redemption, right, et cetera. But an amendment fixes the entire system.
But the question then goes back to, in order to get an amendment, that requires a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress, correct?
No, you can actually go around Congress. 2/3 of the states can propose a convention to just propose an amendment.
How are you going to...
So again, the general argument is that this is always, the argument is unrealistic and impossible. Not practical. We need to be pragmatic and spineless. That's a bit mean to say, but okay, that's kind of where we're at. Again, I don't even really like Cenk Uygur that much at all. And I think there are massive problems with this kind of populist sentiment, and this kind of obsession with populism. But damn it, if it isn't just annoying how literally the only argument is impractical, despite the fact that they don't really, all they basically say is that, well, we've never tried before, and it sounds really hard to do, and I don't think we could do it, so we're not going to try to do it or even think about it. Despite the fact it's like, yeah, but like, again, Republicans have kind of proven that you don't really, like, all the impossibilities, the impossible things that Trump has done, like, they're all terrible, but, like, they were all technically, everyone would say, well, no, a president couldn't possibly do that. No, an administration couldn't do that. No, that's just impossible. It's impractical. It would virtually be impossible. Either he's somehow this wizard god king, or you realize that it actually wasn't that hard to do. It's difficult, and it requires some degree of pig-headed stupidity to do, but god damn it, you can get it done.
3/4 of the states have to ratify.
Which requires the legislature to take action, right? So how do you get legislatures that already are slaves to the corporate donors? Because the book that I believe in says money, the love of money is the root of all evil, and I think that's absolutely true. A lot of these brothers love money. A lot of these sisters love money. So how do you then work, because what this actually is more of a moral issue. So how do you then re-establish proper functioning morality within the hearts of politics?
And again, this is where he wanted to take it. I knew immediately he is a Christian nationalist. The only way we can save this is through Jesus Christ.
Politicians who have already demonstrated they've been bought by this thing called the U.S. dollar. Because that's what this is.
Yeah, two ways to do that, brother. So number one, what Wolfpack does is it pressures state legislatures. The Republican guy or the conservative guy I was talking to earlier, remember we said when you get to the lower and local levels, it gets better and better. The national level is the worst because that involves the most amount of money. So state legislatures, you can move. In fact, Jamie Raskin was opposed to our legislation when he was a state representative in Maryland. And then we talked to him And we convinced him, and he said, "You guys are right. Now I'm going to support the constitutional amendment." So you do get some really good people at the state level. So that's
But
a
the
much
state-
better
but-
path
but
because
we're
they have
talking-
less money. But even
State
so,
is great,
brother,
but
there's the bigger way.
State is great, but here's just a quick question. State is fantastic, but we need changes that impact all Americans to take place at the national level. So it's fine for you to focus on state. I understand that the lower ranking an elected official is, the easier it is probably to change them. How do you change the person that's sitting currently at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, or the 9 Supreme Court justices that are currently on Capitol Hill?
So that's the great thing about the Wolf-Pack plan. It doesn't require the president at all, and it goes above the Supreme Court. So it doesn't require Congress, the president, or the Supreme Court. It's a total end run of the American people against Washington, D.C. And by the way, that's why the Founding Fathers put it in there, to make sure that if Washington got too corrupt, you can actually call for conventions at the state level and get it done. And how do you do that on a national scale? You need one incredible leader to, instead of worrying about himself, to worry about the American people. If he actually, anyone who gets money out of politics is going to have statues built of them all across the country. You need one brave and honest person to say, yes, I'm going to fight for all of you guys, and I'm going to put a world of pressure, yes, on politicians, yes, on politicians in my own party,
So then based
to
on
get
that,
this done.
So based on that, what does that ideal politician look like then? Because we haven't seen it. Trump ran, he said, we're going to drain this swamp. He hasn't drained the swamp.
Yeah.
We're still waiting on the release of the Epstein files. We're still waiting on the full unredacted release of MLK. We're still waiting on the unredacted release of JFK. What does that actual candidate look like? Because all this rhetoric is fantastic, I got to tell you.
So in our lifetime, because of overwhelming
So again, the big thing is that, again, this is a perfection before progress kind of issue. And that would be kind of the thing is like this. I don't think any one candidate, I don't think any one thing is going to solve this. And I think it's a fallacy to argue and to suggest or kind of simplify it down into this one thing. I think it is multiple candidates in a row. I think it is a concerted effort over decades. Again, that's kind of how the Republican Party has managed to maintain such domination control over the narrative for honestly 20 years. Even during the Obama years, they still had an insane amount of control over the narrative, and we were Democrats and liberals were constantly on the back foot responding or trying to fix and placate this extremist kind of faction. Again, that didn't happen just overnight. That started with, honestly, with Reagan, but it certainly ramped up under House Speaker Newt Gingrich and his new form of Republican politics. And what he emphasized was, again, this kind of almost non-functional, anti-democratic, anti-government, anti-anything, hard-nosed approach. And since then, like, it's been a nightmare, but it took 30 years. So it might take 10, 20 years to make major changes, but it's not unrealistic.
money in politics. We haven't seen an ideal candidate like that, is what you're saying.
Right.
And I largely agree, except Bernie Sanders is super honest.
He doesn't have the.
So look, my problem with Bernie is that he didn't have the fight in him. Like, I love the brother, but he should have fought Hillary harder. He should have fought Biden harder. And you need strength to be able to win, right? So, but remember, FDR did it. JFK did it.
FDR.
LBJ did it. With
You mean the same
economic
president?
issues.
FDR did what? What did FDR do besides steal Americans' wealth?
No,
with the illegal executive
brother.
order.
Oh, yeah, no, he's an anti-tax. He's kind of a weird Christian nationalist, probably a bit of libertarian. How dare taxes steal wealth? God damn, it's dumb.
They took our gold from us. What did he do?
He did Social Security.
Oh my God!
He
Come
helped
on.
labor.
FDR stole the last real wealth we had. He stole it when he forced Americans to turn in gold to the Treasury at a rate of $20 an ounce.
Oh God. Oh God. He's like, oh, he's still pissed. He's pissed about the gold. Oh, he's pissed about the gold standard. Okay, whatever. I don't. Oh God. Oh God. Just, it never fails to amaze me how fucking stupid, conservative economics is. Fuck it.
No, it's totally possible.
Hey, just this really quick point.
No.
So it's not that I don't believe, but what I'm asking is, you are talking about the fundamental moral restructuring of
Again, he's a Christian nationalist. This is where it goes.
America. Right now, 2025, there is no politician on Capitol Hill in the White House that has the sort of fire that you're describing, and and what you're saying is again, it's great rhetoric. But if we don't even know what that ideal candidate looks like,
So the reason I mentioned somebody like Jon Stewart is you can't know ahead of time who the ideal candidate is.
Okay.
They got to come through the primary and win, right? But the reason I mention him is because he can get past the Praetorian Guard of the mainstream media because he's a celebrity. So that gets him into the Trump land, past the media, then raise, and I'm on politics. He always don't.
All right, I want to get to where we get to that final point. Choose a participant. Let's see what it is. We might cut this off short, just depending on who it is.
I'm torn on this because there's a couple people who didn't talk, but everybody made good points and was certainly sufficiently aggressive. But Oliver, was it? Yeah, you made good points, and you didn't come up a second time, so I'll go with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Look forward to this opportunity. So my general claim is that Cenk Uygur's populism fails because.
So let's look at this claim. So, claim. Populism fails because it treats social issues as a distraction rather than essential to achieving economic justice. So, social issues. So this is going to be probably some kind of argument about DEI and racism as economic issues stemming from social issues, and class-only focus ignores these and allows for them to continue. Probably. We'll take a guess on that.
It treats social issues as a distraction rather than essential to achieving economic justice. So kind of my claim here is that there are a lot of social issues that are really important and also really popular with American people, as you're talking about, with a lot of economic issues that are just as popular. If we look at something like the public opinion polling regarding Roe v. Wade, like 70% of Americans were against that, the overturning of that. And I think also what's important in this conversation is to say that the line between social and economic issues is not like very clear cut. If we look at something like abortion and reproductive rights, it is the case that if someone gives birth in this country, a woman gives birth, it's upwards of $18,000, which is a huge economic hit to her. And the Turnaway study found that when women get abortions, or if they're actually denied abortions, they follow up with them about 5 years later, they're 4 times as likely to either remain or have fallen below the
It'll pick back up.
federal poverty line. So I think just in general, I'm with you on the claim that we should focus on issues that Americans largely agree about. I just kind of have an issue with, I mean, I saw a recent appearance of yours that, culture war issues, as it's framed, just totally divide. I think there's a bit of a grain of truth to that, and we should focus on what unites us, but there are some cultural issues that really do unite us, even if that's not immediately clear in our media landscape.
Yeah, so let me agree and disagree in parts. So first of all, if you say, hey, here's a social issue that polls at 70%, should we lean into it? Of course.
Okay.
I'm saying don't lean into the social issues where we're in a great disadvantage. Okay. So that's just simple logic and strategy. So for example, Trump again did the travel ban. Originally it was a Muslim ban. You remember that's what he promised on the campaign trail in 2016.
For sure.
And so he's done some variation of that.
Yeah.
Would I tell Democrats, because it affects me and it affects vulnerable communities, you should focus on that first? No.
Okay.
Do not focus on that first. Focus on the things that unite us first. And then you come in and you pass a public option or a paid family leave or higher wages.
Sure.
What you do is you earn credibility with the average American. And they go, okay, now I'm willing to listen. You delivered for me. I now have higher wages or lower drug prices. So what were you saying about the Muslim ban, or what were you saying about transports, or whatever issues that we care about and need people protected on?
Yeah, and I'm really sympathetic to a lot of that. I guess my major issue is a lot of the political revolutions that we see are founded founded on social issues. So let's take a look at something like the civil rights movement, which was followed up by the Voting Rights Act and other things like that that drastically improved people's economic standing because they were able to participate in the labor force without discrimination. We see that they go hand in hand. So I guess I'm just wondering, if we're fighting for women to have reproductive autonomy, which allows them to be full participants in the labor force and not be hamstrung by the fact that they're being forced to carry a pregnancy against their will, it seems like that will actually allow women to be more economically productive and contribute to our economy in ways that benefit all of us and are popular.
So, yeah, again, I would probably agree to a certain extent with this. Is again, yeah, the focus purely on class. Even though I've said I often focus primarily on class stuff, I do agree that this can be an issue here. And again, Cenk's argument that focus on social issues that are actually popular and have more of a consensus rather than niche issues. That's not a great argument against this, but it is kind of the thing, and it's a play by ear aspect, I guess. But there is some degree of a truth to this. But the problem is that things like whether it be trans issues or especially like the trans and sports issue, again, is that an economic? Could we make it economic? Sure, probably in some degree. Is this an argument that should be given a ton of oxygen in the political capital space? I'm perfectly fine from a social and cultural thing. We argue about it all the time, but again, the problem is that the social and cultural is treated in the same venues and same avenues as the political, especially with the advent of social media and the continued kind of erosion of the social and political divide, because they're both the same. Again, there's arguments for and against that, but we'll leave it off for now. It does seem to be one of those things where like we end up, people are getting elected because they're saying they're going to ban transgenders in sports. That's where we're at with this kind of style of argumentation. They're not being elected because they're going to do anything for the state or anything at all. And they're being elected for a 2 or 4 year position, oftentimes re-elected, by just literally saying that, or that they're going to be for it. And this is like, well, this has absolutely nothing to do with like 99% of your job. So there is this kind of problem with that. But again, this is not a terrible argument.
Yeah.
Can we walk and chew gum at the same time? Like, as you talked about, like, I think let's do both, right?
Yeah, I literally said that earlier, as you just referenced.
Yeah.
And so, brother, you're not wrong that they're intertwined, oftentimes, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, while they were doing the civil rights campaign, one of the things that they were pushing forward was something called a freedom budget, which Nina Turner is trying to bring back now.
Yeah.
And so, if you notice, by the way, Martin Luther King Jr. got assassinated once he started doing the poor people's campaign,
exactly.
right?
Very
When you
economic.
got into issues of class. And Fred Hampton got assassinated when he tried to bring the different groups together.
Sure.
When he tried to unite the country, unite different races and different economic classes.
Sure.
So what really puts the powerful back on their heels, what they're really worried about is if we all unite. Sure. That's why I'm trying to tell all you guys here, please let go of the Republican politicians and the Democratic politicians that have been driving.
So again, this is somewhat, again, there's some kind of argument here that I might add on to here, is that perhaps one argument that could be added to Cenk is an argument for tolerance and understanding the true point of the paradox of tolerance that Popper brings up. It is Popper, right? I think it's a Popper one. Yeah, Karl Popper, I believe that's him. But again, the idea of that, the tolerant society will be destroyed by the intolerant, because the tolerant society is so tolerant that they tolerate the intolerable actions of the intolerant, that the intolerable actions will eventually destroy the tolerant, and blah 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 blah. Basically, drags us all down into an intolerant society. The paradox is solved by having a stronger differentiation of not absolute tolerance and not an absolutist process that you are fine to be intolerant towards the intolerable actions and the intolerable positions. So this is one of those things where it's going to be really difficult to find that nuance, But the big thing is that is racism intolerable? Some would argue yes, some would argue no, some would argue that it depends on what the racism is affecting. Um, and the difference between the personal and the individual level and the social and kind of system level. So that's where that divide, and it is a difficult kind of divide to go through. And there's a nice kumbaya sense from Cenk that's like, oh, let's just forget all about this and we'll work it out later. We'll just get these larger things passed. And I can almost see and understand that, but this is the flaw of the populist kind of sentiment, is that it just assumes we can all just kumbaya together.
Us apart. So if they use social issues to bring us back together, great. But they almost always use the social issues to divide us, so that we're so at loggerheads that we don't go, hey, maybe we should raise our wages.
I think it depends on the issue, and I think you can definitely speak to both things. I guess I'm just wondering then, if we use that type of reasoning, what would be your advice around the civil rights movement? Because, for example, racial integration was very unpopular before the Civil Rights Act was passed and the Brown v. Board of Education decision. Would you say that politicians don't lean into it? It's too controversial. You're going to alienate people. Just focus on economic issues. And if they did that, where would we be today?
Yes, you're right. There has to be a moral exception from time to time.
Sure.
So then the question is, wait, is it a giant moral exception, or is it a relatively small issue on a hill we're choosing to die on? So let me give you the distinction.
Okay.
So gay marriage, I thought, was a core constitutional right.
Sure.
So even when it was very unpopular, I fought for it.
Good.
And we fought and fought and fought until we won, and we convinced the majority of the American people.
Great.
And only after we convinced the majority did we convince Democratic politicians like Obama and Biden to move. If we had just gone after the politicians, we would not have succeeded in the beginning.
Okay, for sure.
So now when you get to trans women have the right, or they must be allowed to go into sports leagues like the WNBA, we're not at a core constitutional issue.
And I'm not even addressing that issue.
Right.
I'm talking directly, because you talk about a moral issue. And I think abortion is a moral issue, and everyone in this circle will agree with that, regardless of which side they fall on it. And I think that women...
And we fight super aggressively on the other side.
So I guess just then, I'm worried that when your messaging is so much culture war issues distract, culture war issues divide, what it sounds like to me is women's bodily autonomy isn't a core moral issue that is worth fighting for in the same way that gay marriage is to you. That's what it sounds like. Feel free to correct the record.
No, I love that you're clarifying that.
Okay.
No, that's a core constitutional right.
Okay.
That's your liberty that's being taken away.
Absolutely.
I mean, you want to talk about cancel culture? You know, that's when you say, hey, you don't have the right to control.
So yeah, again, this would be one of those things that I think this is healthy to clarify this. And again, it is a problem of the populist, and though that is that they often say this so much that it's like, look, well, what are the actual important ones? Because it seems like no matter what issues being talked about, you're talking about how it's a problem of culture war. And again, there's lots of problems with culture war, and I'm not gonna say there isn't, but yeah, this is a good kind of comeback.
Your own body. We're canceling that right. We're taking that freedom away from you. Look, when you look at transgender issues, for example, so should they be allowed to serve in the military? And I know a lot of right wing will disagree with me, but yes, that's a core constitutional issue.
Sure.
Yes, they should have the same rights. But I don't have a right to play in the NBA. They don't have a right to play in the WNBA. That's not a constitutional right.
Sure.
My problem is sometimes the extreme left, they say, okay, no, you should do the maximalist approach, and that is the better strategy.
And we're going to die on that hill, basically.
Yeah, and I'm saying don't die on that hill.
Sure.
And I'll give you an example again from my own community. I'm desperate to get the Palestinians peace.
Sure.
I'm desperate to get Israel to stop the genocide and their attacking, etc.
Totally agree.
So they do a protest in Washington, D.C. They burn the American flag and write Hamas on a statue. No, don't do that.
I'm in agreement with you there.
Because if you burn the American flag, you're saying you want to drive Americans away from you. No, invite Americans, bring American flags to that protest.
Could not agree more. I think
I hate the pearl clutching over the burning of the flag. Again, it's just maybe I'm just a weird old hippie, even though I'm not that old or hippie-ish. But I really, really, I understand the symbolism to a certain degree, but I don't give a shit about the burning of a flag. It's a piece of cloth.
Then what I just don't see then how that comes back to the claim that culture wars kind of divide us. And if they do,
Brother,
does that mean we should move away?
Did you not see the trans issue divide the hell out of us?
100%. You are using one issue to describe all of.
But that is kind of the thing, is that it's always one issue at a time. but it takes up a lot of oxygen. It takes up a lot of political and social oxygen and capital for that to exist. And that's where I might kind of come into this, is that it is to ignore how much the transgender in sports, how much oxygen that fucking took up, and how much divide that created, is kind of underselling it and kind of starting to say, well, there's so much more. It's like, yeah, but that's the thing. For a while, for at least 2-3 years, it feels like that was kind of it. For a good chunk of the time, that was just it.
Of the
But then
culture
you
war
got DEI.
okay, well, we can talk about that, but
Right.
you would then have to specify and be a bit more clear, because look, I understand that we're on YouTube and the goal is to get clicks, and when you make kind of very like absolute statements like all Democrats and Republicans are
But do you
the
see
same,
what I'm saying?
do
you see what I'm saying?
I see what I'm saying, and I probably agree a lot with
Okay,
you
great.
on a lot of stuff. I think that when you sideline social issues and make it seem like social issues are secondary, to me, like I think that there are some things that shouldn't be secondary.
All I'm trying to get people to realize is that, first of all, in my opinion, the right wing is the one that brings up all of these issues. They went looking for a fight on
Sure,
critical
they
race
did.
theory.
Yep.
They went looking for a fight on DEI. They went looking for a fight on trans sports.
Yep.
When they get you in a situation where they've got you on an unpopular policy,
Correct.
Stop
I
falling
agree with
into
you.
that trap
Sure,
and that ambush.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you in part. I think the problem as well with how the prompt is framed is it treats right-wing fake culture war issues that they make up with real, actual issues like women's bodily autonomy. So, like, I think there's just an issue
your
in general.
distinction is no problem at all.
Okay.
It's just what I've lived in the real world is that when I say, hey, maybe we shouldn't go maximalist on every issue, all of the other left-wing hosts attack me and go, you're not pure enough. I'm
sure.
going to get more clicks than you by being
Yeah.
even more
and
pure.
I'm the first person to stand there and agree with you that maximalism might not be the correct solution. Often
Okay. I
isn't.
think we're kind of done.
And as we're winding down, it's just really important to not neglect social issues such as women's access to their own bodies, such as LGBTQ
You
rights,
don't have
such
to
as all that.
neglect them.
Okay, good. Then I guess then asking you moving forward, maybe make an emphasis that your populism doesn't neglect the very groups that you claim to want.
But isn't that then creating the problem, is that, again, I still, like, how much do I have to do this? Do I have to do this every single time? Do I have to do this every other minute? How much emphasis must always be given? This kind of creates this kind of thing to where, like, well, I'm not saying do this, but I just want you to make me feel like you're doing this properly, or you're doing this enough. It's like, yeah, but is it? Like, do I have to bring it up every single time? Do I have to always go 100%? What is the line? And can I just have a segment where I don't mention it at all and I just talk about something else?
To fight for.
You got
That's
a
what I'm
deal.
saying. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right.
It's been great.
Okay. First of all, 20 against 1, I was born for it.
I'm a populist like Jake, and I was familiar with the Young Turks. His debate style was very, very good. I think he gave both the opposing speaker and himself ample opportunity to have an actual conversation, which is a rarity on the
Now, he did interrupt a fair bit, but and kind of bully pulpit the talking time, but
show like this, I have to say.
I've seen Cenk move a little bit. You know, the 2018 Cenk of Justice Democrats did really focus on these issues like he was sitting here today doing. And I would love to see a return of that Cenk.
I think in my conversation, he kind of dodged a little bit. I would have loved to have a little bit more of an open discussion on kind of how he aims to reconcile racial differences in this country.
I don't want him to lean away from social issues and not put emphasis on them because
I think Zena's slightly right. But again, there just wasn't also a lot of time. I don't think they had a lot of time in that initial discussion.
they're hard. Shying away from it because it might lose you some people isn't the way that progress is made.
In a lot of online debates, people are really playing to the audience at home. They're not really trying to convince the person they're talking to reconsider their assumptions. And Oliver was able to successfully get Cenk to realize, no, actually, social issues are important.
Z did.
I don't think he did, but I don't know. I think that it's unfair to suggest that he needed convincing on this, but whatever, we'll let it go.
Is absolutely amazing. I'm actually a follower of hers on TikTok, and I've seen a lot of her content. And we do disagree. We're on completely opposite sides of the political spectrum, but she spoke with clarity. She spoke concise points. She made Jay backtrack just a little bit, which is always fun to watch, especially again in a show like this.
One of the people who was right-wing said it to me at the end, after we wrapped, he said, I was really surprised on how much we all agreed on. Exactly. But you got to get past the media, the money in politics, and the politicians to get to the places where we agree.
All right. Again, overall, compared to the last Jubilee that we had to cover, that was infinitely less painful and soul-crushing.